Yeah. The spirit of being here.
Yes, the chair of the panel is online, so you can take over. Yeah, please, you can take over, sir.
The chair of the panel wants to know whether it is actually 12:40. Sorry, wrong time. 5:45 or 5:30.
It's 5:30.
Okay, what I have on the final program is 5:45. Fine. I try to come early for things, so I am in a good place. Can you just give me 3 minutes so that I can? Well, we are about to start.
All right, sir.
Are we ready?
We are ready.
Well, good evening, distinguished colleagues. My name is Cyril Obi, and I have been asked to chair this session. This session is one of those that features a panel that celebrates one of Nigeria's distinguished scholars. I have been informed that we are celebrating Professor Olufunke Mojubaolu Okome, who is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College. She is a sole author and editor of 7 books. She combines the best of the finest academic traditions and activism. She's a scholar activist, a feminist, a political scientist, somebody we are all genuinely proud of. Her expertise includes democratization and economic liberalization, democracy, human rights, nationalism, ethnicity, economic and political development, state-society relations, as well as globalization and gender relations, with a focus on Africa within the global economy. You are witnessing a panel that I see deservedly honors one of Nigeria's finest scholars. I happen to know Professor Okome personally, and I have benefited a lot from her. When you describe somebody who is a mentor extraordinaire, she is a great academic leader. She's worthy of celebration, and I am actually privileged to be chairing this panel on her. Well, of course, she's a Leonard and Claire Toll Professor, 2015 to 2016 at Brooklyn College, and she has received a lot of academic honors and prizes. She's also particularly connected to scholarship and Project Nigeria. She was one of the co-founders of the Bring Back Our Girls, New York, and she has actually matched her words with action. This is a rare quality, but I think I will pause here. We have a lot of speakers who have been lined up for this panel. Now, if you will give me I have to, because I have to look at the program. And now for this session, which is on security, political economy, diaspora, and activism. We have 5 speakers. We have Professor Temitope Oriola, who is speaking on gender, terrorism, and human rights. We have Professor Abosede Babatunde, who is speaking on extractive politics, women and security in Nigeria's all enclaves. We also have in our midst Professor Fatima Abdullah, who will be speaking on violence and dislocation, unraveling the impact of kidnapping and armed banditry on women and children in Katsina. We have Emeka Njoku, Dr. Emeka Njoku, and Dr. Isaac Derry, who will be speaking on moral injury, a theory of sexual violence against men in counter-terrorism operations. We also will be speaking, we have Omotolani Onike, who would be, I don't know whether Omotolani is a professor or a doctor, so I apologize in advance. I would automatically promote him or her as Professor Omotolani Onike, and he will be speaking to nature and conflict, kidnapping and cattle herders, farmers' violence in Nigeria. These are all very rich topics, and without further ado, I would now invite the first of our speakers, Professor Temitope Oriola, to please have the floor and speak to his paper for about 12 minutes. Professor Oriola, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Cyril Obi. I am delighted to join you in honor of an extraordinary scholar and human being. I do know Professor Okome by reputation. I have not had the privilege of meeting her in person, but I am really pleased to be here. I hope you can all see my slides. If I can get a thumbs up from the LSA curator. Okay, thank you. I'm speaking on gender, terrorism, and human rights. On 14th April 2014, can we mute? There's a feedback there. Thank you. On 14th April 2014, 276 girls were kidnapped in northeast Nigeria, Borno State. Nearly 60 of those girls escaped on the night of their capture. And we now know that between 2016 and 24 April of this year, 137 of them have since returned from captivity, while at least 82 are still missing. And of course, many of you are familiar with the Bring Back Our Girls movement, the global advocacy, and the involvement of all manner of celebrities and politicians and so on and so forth. And of course, the broader context is the incursion of Boko Haram and its rise to prominence, especially in the early 2000s. And I'm going to skip a whole bunch of things on my slides because I understand we have 5 speakers and each would have 12 minutes. So Boko Haram, of course, pledged allegiance to ISIS, once declared an Islamic State, and so on and so forth. Boko Haram began deploying male suicide bombers in 2011, and by 2014, it began to deploy female suicide bombers, and that's a significant shift, and that is the crux of my presentation today. Available evidence suggests that up to 56% of Boko Haram's suicide bombings within a few years of beginning that were in fact female, and the youngest was only 7 years old. Now, I find this quote from Professor Okome's work incredibly didactic for my own work. She talks about the captive, the positionality of the captive, and how it's like walking a tightrope. She says it's tense, it's tenuous, it's perilous, and so forth. I find this extremely instructive for my own purposes and analysis. I'm going to skip a whole bunch of things on this slide, but I'll focus on just one thing, and that is the concept of suicide terrorism, to simply state that Suicide terrorism is a situation in which the perpetrator does not intend to leave. The individual fully expects to not survive the attack. Contemporary suicide terrorism is linked back to the 1983 truck bombing of the U.S. Embassy, as well as French military back in Beirut. And of course, this tactic has since spread all around the world. Sri Lanka, Chechnya, Israel, Palestine, Turkey, Afghanistan, Nigeria, and so on and so forth. There are certain basic characteristics of countries where suicide bombings do occur. One of those is the significance of occupation by some kind of colonizing power, whether in the past or at present. They do share that characteristic. And part of this also, the characteristics also include major socioeconomic problems. They tend to be fundamentally unequal societies. They tend to also have prolonged conflict or violence, what my colleague Knight and Mbeshi have called a tormented society. There also tends to be a level of opportunity structure, so the presence of a terrorist organization that has an ideology that is favorably disposed to the use of the tactics, as well as the capacity for indoctrination. And the deployment of females as suicide bombers is generally viewed in the literature as evidence that the conflict has significantly exacerbated. But why do terrorist groups make use of female suicide bombers? A lot has to do with the positionality of women in the terrorist groups, the huge media attention that such female persons attract, and of course, less scrutiny by security agents, the depletion of men in prolonged conflicts. And of course, there's the whole question of lethality, the widespread belief for decades, really, that female suicide bombers were in fact more lethal than their male counterparts in terms of the kill ratio. Much older data do in fact support that assertion, but more recent evidence have indicated increasingly that depends on what group you're looking at, and of course the question of law enforcement strategy and so on and so forth. Now, on to the study, slides of which I will be sharing today. The broader study is titled Failure to Detonate, Gender and Inchoate or Incomplete Suicide Missions. My colleague, Andy Knight, and I begin with a small but powerful book by Talal Assad, where he raises the question, why did he do this terrible thing? And we invert that question and ask, why did she refuse to do this terrible thing? In other words, we're interested in exploring the genetic and gender dimensions of suicide bombings, failed suicide bombings. And so we're interested in female persons and their involvement and all of that. Now, and research questions include why such women refused despite being indoctrinated and the policy implications of that. But why Boko Haram? And of course, speaking to an international audience, obviously that's an important point to make. We now know that Boko Haram has deployed far more female suicide bombers than any other terrorist organization in the world. It took that over from LTTE, the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka. They used to be the #1 in that aspect, but Boko Haram has since taken over. We know that female suicide terrorism is a growing global problem, up to 15% of the global share of suicide terrorism. And of course, our belief is that learning from those young women and their associates could help inform policy around the world. In terms of our theoretical approach, we draw on Akile Mbembe's concept of necropolitics, the politics of death. And Mbembe asks questions around the right to kill, to allow to live, and how those rights are exercised, and who is the subject of this right, and the implications of that, and how we may understand the relationship between the attacker and the ones who are targeted. We also draw on Hannah Arendt, and particularly her analysis of life at the concentration camp, a kind of life in death or death in life, standing outside of humanity, as it were. And so we see parallels between the terrorist camps that some of those we interviewed had been to or had been held captive, and the concentration camps that Arendt chronicles. And of course, the idea, again, dating back to Mbembe, that the three major losses that these individuals have experienced: the loss of their home, their rights over their bodies, and their political status. We also draw on contentious politics. I do not have the time to go into that, but I'm happy to speak to that during the Q&A. In terms of our data and methods, we draw on interviews and focus group discussions with women and girls who were deployed but refused to detonate their suicide bombs. 4 of those were in custody of the Nigerian Army as of 2019, and I had the opportunity to interview them with the kind permission of the then Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukur Buratai. We were also able to interview wives or sex slaves of Boko Haram. 25 of those were interviewed. Domestic servants, about 15 of those. Former Boko Haram or male operatives, 5 of those. And the length of captivity or engagement of those individuals with Boko Haram ranged from 6 months to 4 years. We also draw on secondary data. I will not overplug any of that. I will just make a quick caveat before transitioning to another slide that when I asked questions in English, as I did not speak Hausa or Kanuri, so there were interviews where I would ask my questions in English, and one of my research assistants would translate into Hausa, but there were some of the participants who did not, in fact, speak Hausa, only spoke Kanuri, and then that had to be interpreted to Kanuri. So our expectation is that certain nuances and subtleties might have been lost in the course of the multiple translations, and it is incalculable in the research. Now, on to the findings. Our analysis, the preliminary analysis, I should say, demonstrates that there are 6 stages in the deployment of the suicide bombers by Boko Haram: selection, isolation, indoctrination, adornment and censured beatification, marching orders, and the suicide act or escape. In terms of selection, now the individuals who are chosen come from a variety of sources: kidnappings by Boko Haram, and donation of spouses by some males, fathers and daughters being donated by some fathers, and for some of those women, involvement in romantic relationships with Boko Haram operatives. And to put that into perspective, in one of my previous publications, I did note how between 2015 and 2018, the Nigerian military rescued over 28,000 people were held captive by Boko Haram. And of course, most of them were said to be women and children. So just to give the magnitude, the scale of the numbers. And here, a participant walks us through the selection process, how Boko Haram prefers younger girls from ages 10 to roughly 20. And this individual said that they had personally witnessed up to 21 persons at different times being selected and deployed and never came back to their camp. Now, the next stage, adornment and censured beatification. This is both a cultural and religious ceremony. Essentially, the suicide bomber, the female suicide bomber, is adorned like a bride who is getting ready to go to Jannah to meet the spouse. And so there's a fusion of a culture and a religion, and preparing and plaiting their hair, using local tattoos or lalle, and separating them from the rest of the group, and prepping them for deployment to carry out the suicide act. Now, there were, of course, some of the young women who, in fact, did not intend to carry out the act, but had volunteered as a way of escaping Boko Haram's captivity. And they saw this as a viable way of making an escape. Our evidence indicates that after being adorned like brides and separated, they're better treated, and the deployment process takes place within 1 to 7 days of the initial selection. Now, in terms of refusing to death, and then keep in mind I did mention the agentic as well as the gendered aspects. Now, some of those who refused to detonate spoke about the excessive brutal treatment that they witnessed, the way that Boko Haram treated other captives. And so they began to find courage in the camaraderie, in the interactions they had amongst themselves at the camp. And some began to doubt that there was, in fact, any kind of reward for killing infidels. And some of the women also began to notice the religious hypocrisy of some of the top leaders at Boko Haram's camps and realized that these were not particularly religious people and were just using the religion. And some of the captives who in fact had training in doctrine, in Islamic doctrine, understood that much of what they were being taught at the camp did not really cohere with the Quran. One, for example, one of the individuals who refused to blow herself up talked about just asking herself, what would she accomplish by doing this? What would she gain from it? And she just removed it herself, threw it to the ground, and was promptly arrested by the military. Now, we also found an interesting victim-perpetrator dynamic where former captives who were married to top Boko Haram commanders began to carve out a level of agency and latitude for themselves, but over time began to be brutal towards other captives, maltreating other captives. Now, this is an aspect of the issue that has yet to garner any significant attention in scholarly literature. One of the participants, for example, was married to a Boko Haram commander that she commanded up to 20 women, who worked under her, and she gave orders to slaughter men, literally, in some of the rural communities that they raided. Now, still on resistance, we also found how women at the camp instrumentalized the gender roles that they were given, specifically the role with respect to preparing meals for the fighters, the male fighters. And essentially, they did this by food poisoning, grinding mirror or glass. This was the commonest object they could find. They would blend them and put them in the food served to some of the most atrocious male fighters at the camp. And of course, there were instances of capital punishment when some of those women were found out. I'm going to skip all of that in the interest of time and just breeze through some of the conclusions that we are able to draw. First is that Boko Haram has dubious religious or ideological commitment. We believe that in dealing with this group and its splintered factions, this can be a nest. The other part of it, of course, is how essentially terrorists weaponize the patriarchal ideational infrastructure of society. And therefore, interventions need to begin very early if we're to prevent female-suicide terrorism. And female empowerment is also absolutely crucial in this effort, as well as, of course, attending to the debilitating socioeconomic conditions in the zones where these incidents are happening. And what is also clear from our analysis is that the suicide bombing process is rarely an individual act. It is, in fact, informed by a number of macro and meso-sociological variables. There has to be the conducive broader environment, as well as an organization that is driving the indoctrination, the selection, and of course, the material aspect. Items that are required to carry that act out. And of course, time will not permit me to go into any sustained discussion around state repression and the role that state repression plays. But in interviews with a lot of the participants, state repression, the activities of the military in those regions played a major role in the recruitment. And those who volunteered, for example, to join Boko Haram often cited the brutality that their family members received in the hands of the authorities. And for us, that leads us as scholars to conclude that in part that state legitimacy rests on a fragile foundation, and therefore state actors have to be careful in how they act so as not to inexorably draw their citizens into the hands of non-state violent actors. And on that note, I would like to thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Oriola. I think it perhaps was difficult to, given the expansive work that you have done on Boko Haram. I congratulate you. A few 12 minutes may have been a bit harsh, but I'm really very happy that you were able to dig into the topic sufficiently, exploring the concepts, the methods, the analysis, as well as the implications of gender, terrorism, and human rights, which also resonates so much with the work of the scholar that we are celebrating in this panel. And this is very good. Once more, thank you, Professor Riola, University of Alberta, Canada, for joining us in this panel. I expect that your presentation would attract a lot of comments and questions. Next, it is my pleasure to call Professor Abosede Babatunde of the University of Ilorin to present her paper on extractive politics, women and security in Nigeria's oil enclaves. Abosede, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I greet everyone, and particularly Professor Mojubaolu Okome. We are celebrating today. My work focuses on how extractive politics influence women's participation and role in the security crisis in the Niger Delta. And by extractive politics, I mean that how politics about who get oil benefits and how by the global oil multinational and national government and local leaders who are in control of these oil benefits and oil benefit in terms of compensation for environmental degradation of farmland, also for empowerment programs, scholarship, royalty to oil communities. At the same time, issues about local contract for construction of development projects, how women marginalization in accessing this benefit influence their participation in what the security crisis. And when I say security crisis, I am talking about how the lingering violence in the Niger Delta, despite the numerous peace building and development program of the Nigerian government, global multinational, continue to linger. And this insecurity, this development effort of government, for example, creation of an interventionist agency like the recent Niger Delta Development Corporation, Ministry of the Niger Delta, Amnesty for the Youth Militant, which were efforts to address the insecurity, militancy, violence in the Niger Delta. But the reality is that even though the amnesty program for the youth militant was perceived to have led to relative peace in the Niger Delta, the reality is that there is still lingering violence, and many recent studies are documented the incident of insecurity linked to sea piracy, artisanal oil refining, oil bunkering, court gang violence, and various forms of inter and inter-community crisis. At the same time, even though there is a perception that militants sees destruction of oil facilities, kidnapping of oil workers, the reality is that there are still significant incidences of pipeline vandalism, oil, which continue to lead to what? Reduction in oil production. And at the same time, also oil revenue for the government. And it's also a major source of environmental degradation that continue to what impact adversely on the farming and fishing activities the people. my work paper drawn extensive field work in the Niger Delta state of Bayelsa, Delta, Rivers, and Akwa Ibom. And I also draw on feminist political ecology perspective, which focuses on how environmental changes shape gender inequality and how women respond to these challenges. And at the same time, I engage with Professor Okome's work, particularly the one on sex, gender, and politics in Nigeria, governance, structure, and culture, where she described how women experience of structural violence continue to impact on their capacity to contribute meaningfully to the political system in Nigeria. She emphasized the fact that Nigeria has continued to have significant challenges in which women continue to deny women their meaningful participation in politics. And she also highlighted the fact that Nigeria has continued to rank low in the Global Gender Index. And in particular in 2022, where there is a significant bit of improvement where Nigeria were ranked around 130, but that's that there is a significant gap of various success Nigeria government, how they have continued to create low participation for women in the political space. In my study, I look at the local governance at the local level, in the case of Niger Delta, because even though this Nigeria governance structure that continues to perpetuate women marginalization, permeate or structure of politics from the global to national and the local level. And I also look at how global or multinational exploit this patriarchal structure at the local level to perpetuate women marginalization in terms of access to this oil benefit. And at the same time, I ask questions about how do women respond to these challenges? How do they respond to their socioeconomic marginalization? Professor Okome talked about the fact that women marginalization experience of structural violence has been a driving force for their participation in violent extremists like Boko Haram, just as Professor Oriola also explained. In the case of Niger Delta, women experience of structural violence, inequality, participation, are then vulnerable to what participation in what violence. Women traditionally in pre-colonial African society and in the Niger Delta, women have played critical role in peace building, in caregiving, nurturing, in terms of food provision for their family and community, and this is critical to the well-being of their society. But over time, they have also played a key role in non-violent agitation for what resource control, environmental change. For example, I look at the case of this non-violent environmental campaign by late Kenro Wiwa, where the Niger Delta women under the female wing of MOSO play critical role in the non-violent struggle. But women are now playing active role in the violent agitation in the Niger Delta. Studies have established the key role they play in the militant struggle. Also, women have played a role, and I think also Professor Oriola had a publication identifying the role women play in the militant struggle. I also look at my study explore the roles that women are playing in the lingering violence in the Niger Delta, and the role they are playing in sort of artisanal oil refining, which is very rampant in oil community, and it's a source of income for most of the impoverished youth, even local men, women. Women play a varied role in the artisanal refining. They play a role as business partner to those who refine the oil. They play a role in buying the stolen oil and then selling to those who refine. And women play key role in what? In the retail aspect of artisanal oil refining, whereby they buy the refined oil, kerosene, petrol, and they sell it. And this artisanal oil refining aggravates environmental harms in the linked to oil pollution in the Niger. It's damaged the creeks where they be able to generate sort of fishery resources. Also, it pollute farmland and it undermines capacity of people to be able to cope with the challenge. We need to understand that while some women are involved in these criminal activities, others are not involved. So those women who are not continue to be at the receiving end. Also, women play a role in oil brokering activities. They also play a role in court gang violence. They play a role as informants, spies. They also play a role in even attack gun grab. And this has been a major source of crisis in community where local leaders hide those court gangs to protect them. Also, they hear them during political election. Women also play a role, young girls, in harm and spiritual fortification for some of these court gangs. And this has been a source of security. So the local actors, male-led actors involved in all these criminal activities, they capitalize on women's vulnerability and their experience of socioeconomic deprivation to draw women into all these criminal activities. And it's undermine women's capacity to contribute meaningfully to their communities, their family, exposed to a life of crime. It also leads to a situation where women also perpetuate violence against women. And at the same time, it leads to a situation whereby men are not able to realize, and it also did not translate to women in participation in politics because the licit place political local government continue to be close to them, whereby they are able to generate space in this space, which does not translate and continue to shape the tactics of this armed group involved in all these security crisis in the Niger Delta. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Babatunde, for taking us on a journey through the lingering violence and security crisis in the Niger Delta, and the way you have unpacked the expressions of gender relations, both in terms of resistance, both in terms of peace building, but also in terms of sometimes colluding with various levels of extraction and oppression. I think that you have also connected some of the violence to manifestations of violence in other parts of the country. You have underlined these forms of violence in terms of sea piracy, artisanal refining, cult-related violence, communal violence, and also indirectly the violence of the state. At this point, I would say that your presentation opens the door, again, like the preceding presentation, to connect some of your analysis to the work of the scholar in whose honor this panel has been convened. It is therefore, I want to thank you again, Abosede Babatunde, University of Ilorin, and it is now my honor to invite the next speaker, and she is Professor Fatima Abdullah of the Umaru Musa Aradua University. I presume that's in Katsina State, Nigeria. And her presentation would be on violence and dislocation, unraveling the impact of kidnapping and armed banditry on women and children in Katsina. Professor, you have the floor.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank, first of all, I would like to thank LSA for giving the opportunity of being here to present in person through its travel grants. Secondly, this panel like to honor and acknowledge Professor Olufunke Mojubaolu Okome, a recognition of her scholarly contributions on politics, conflict, and security in Nigeria. So even though I'm not a professor, but Dr. Fatwa Abdullahi, and my topic is on violence and dislocation, unraveling the impact of kidnapping and armed banditry on women and children in Katsina.
Oh, I will let you next for me.
Dr. Abdullahi, you may continue.
Okay, my research, I use the methodology, my methodology is a qualitative one, using both primary and secondary data as well as personal observation. Then the scope of my research is kidnapping, trying to show the impact of armed banditry and kidnapping in Katsina, that's Katsina State, on women and children, how insecurity affected women and children. So kidnapping and armed banditry are among the major security challenges that trouble northern Nigeria. The geographical scope of this research is Katsina, which is known to be the one of the major states in the country suffering from the activities of armed bandits and kidnappers. The victims of this insecurity studied under this research came mainly from 8 local government areas, namely Basari, Dutama, Ndume, Musa, Paskari, Jibia, Kankara, Sabwa, and Safana local government areas. However, most of these local government areas are sharing borders with the forests of Zamfara State, where numerous groups of kidnappers and armed bandits are operating. So this made the situation difficult and complicated to tackle. So the introduction, for the past 2 decades, northern Nigeria has been facing many security challenges ranging from Boko Haram insurgency, armed banditry, and kidnapping, coupled with the ethno-religious and political conflict and socio-economic hardship. Most part of the region became unbearable to people. And it does not mean that there was no conflict or insecurity in those regions prior to this period. However, the level of that threat presently with the current situation, security challenges have generated in the region are unimaginable. So an overview of armed banditry and kidnapping in northern Nigeria. Katsina is known for centuries as a peaceful place, known as the home of hospitality. However, with the activities of Boko Haram in the northeastern region, which later stretched to other northern states, as well as the activities of armed bandits and kidnappers in the forest of Zamfara State, Katsina also became the den of armed bandits and kidnappers, terrorizing many parts of the state. And by 2023, about 22 out of the 34 local government areas in the state were affected with insecurity. Then the genesis of this armed banditry and kidnapping. The contemporary armed banditry and kidnapping originated around 2011 in Zamfara State as a farmer-herder conflict to rural, is later turned to rural unrest, rural banditry, and then metamorphosis into full-blown organized criminal activity assisted by terrorist groups in Africa. Due to the lucrative nature of the crimes, it spread to other northwestern states, Katsina inclusive. Armed bandits and kidnappers are known for mass killing of innocent people, target victims, cattle rustling, kidnapping for ransom, rape, armed robbery, child labor, and other related human rights abuses. Within the last 2 decades, armed bandits and kidnappers in Katsina killed thousands of people, both civilian, military, police, paramilitary, leading to displacement of many, destruction of properties, deterioration of economic activities, as well as rise of poverty. The impact of armed banditry and kidnapping on women and children. As armed bandits became menaced in Katsina, kidnapping people for ransom also became a major security challenge to the state. Kidnappers armed with modern firearms in most cases, about 200 or more, on motorcycles, they attack communities, they rustle animals and take along with them mostly women and children who are the most vulnerable in society. So from 2020 to 2022, there was no single day that somebody was not being killed or abducted in Katsina. Also in 2022, banditry and insurgency led to the closure of all schools in all and institutions in all the 8 local government areas in the state mentioned previously. So as earlier stated, that most of the abducted victims were women and children. It should be noted that a lot of the abducted women were heavily pregnant. Of them, they delivered while in abduction, while others lost their lives due to the hardship or lack of proper health care services while in abduction. Others were raped, forcibly married off to their abductors, and in most cases, they became physically unstable even after gaining their freedom. So in the areas under their control, the bandits imposed farming and grazing levies on the local communities. So these conditions forced thousands of people to become internally displaced. Most of these people moved to Katsina metropolis and became beggars just to earn a living. The living condition of the dislocated people is unhealthy. Most of them living in uncompleted buildings, under the bridges, or in public primary schools. So due to the activities of armed bandits and kidnappers, children of many communities in Katsina became out of school. Together with their mothers, these children frequently roaming about Katsina metropolis, begging for food, clothes, or shelter. As a matter of fact, there is no place in Katsina metropolis that you will not see these internally displaced women and children begging to sustain a living, be it markets, mosques, bakeries, food, traffic, streets, shops, houses, hospitals, etc. This the picture of some of these children begging in one of the markets in Katsina metropolis. The next slide is a woman also begging with 2 of her children in front of one shop. So efforts to tackle armed banditry and kidnapping, although from the federal down to local government levels, efforts were made to tackle banditry and insecurity in northern Nigeria, yet the problem is still at large. So in conclusion, so far the presentation has examined the causes of armed banditry that initially started as a cattle killer, the farmer had a crisis, but it's also a metamorphosis into a present kidnapping for ransom and armed banditry. So the current insecurity state, armed banditry and kidnapping therefore had significantly affected Katsina State in the form of widespread dislocation of people, especially women and children, poverty, unemployment, food shortage, neglect of child education, health problems, loss of lives and properties, and widespread of beggars across the metropolis. So there is urgent need from the federal government from the government at all levels and the general society to tackle this problem of insecurity in the country. This is to shun and prevent the unemployed men and women, uneducated children who are hungry with no shelter or any economic opportunity to become a big problem to the country at large. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatima Abdullahi of Umaru Musa Aradua University, Katsina. This is also a very interesting presentation that has touched on a topic that is so close to our hearts. I like it that the paper started with the whole question of the research method that was used, and also mentioned about the risks that were involved. I would imagine that some of our participants would want to know how the researcher was able to navigate the field in these conflict-affected communities and the ethical issues that were involved. Your paper also resonates in terms of looking at violence, in terms of looking at the gender dimensions, the socioeconomic dimensions, and the evolution of violence from farmer-herder conflicts to armed banditry, as well as kidnapping. In your conclusions, you also alluded to the need for government to begin to respond to the violence and the attendant insecurity. I believe that questions are also going to come about your recommendations, but I want to congratulate you for actually being courageous enough to take on this topic, which is very interesting. And I'm sure that the discussions that will follow would further enrich this presentation. And having said this, I want to go to the next paper, which is co-authored. It's titled A Theory of Sexual Violence Against Men in Counter-Terrorism Operations. Usually the discussion is about violence against women and children, but now we are going to listen to a presentation on violence against men. The lead author is Emeka Njoku, and he is from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Emeka, you have the floor to give your presentation.
Thank you so much. Yes. About what? Just is the app that you use not compatible. But don't worry, I'll link it for you. No, don't close the PowerPoint. There's no that we won't see. We have it on sale, like use my laptop. Or can you just minimize that? You can press the PowerPoint and you don't do
Yeah, Dr. Njoku, I assume that there are a couple of technical issues to be resolved.
Can you connect his own computer? Can you use mine? Yeah, just present without that.
If he's not ready, can we ask the next person to save time?
But present without. Okay, this is okay. All right. Just ignore it. Don't just press the PowerPoint. Are you able to move that thing to the side? You can forward. What to be there? Yeah.
Hello, can you advise me on what to do?
Can I just say which part of just present without all of that? Yeah, okay. Go ahead. All right, thank you. Thank you very, can you hear me? Thank you very much, Professor Stereo. And
Unfortunately, you can't see what I'm looking at. So my research is titled Moral Injury, a Framework for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. The research is a part of research that was sponsored by the American Council of Learned Societies. It was titled Masculinity, Male Bodies, and Victimhood in the Context of Counterterrorism. So while looking at Professor Okome's work, I see particularly the one on fleeing Boko Haram, the trauma of captivity and challenges of freedom, where she argued that many people view captivity and freedom as complete opposites. Or captivity involves imprisonment, detention, and confinement, while freedom is characterized by liberty or free will. She, however, argued that there is a link between captivity and trauma, and the connection between freedom and its absence is intuitive. The lasting effects of trauma can complicate the concept of freedom, particularly when considering the psychological impacts, prolonged impact of captivity. And this leads so much to my research on moral injury, which is moral injury is defined as a psychological effect that is endured by combatants when they witness or are made aware of certain acts that transgress their moral, ethical principles, of which they are moral or ethical principles. And so that is the definition of the concept of moral injury. And there are key elements of moral injury, and that is you would find violation of moral beliefs that I said earlier, feelings of guilt and shame, and also feelings of betrayal, rage, various forms of psychological distress that has been experienced by people. Particularly, this moral injury happens to people, particularly those in healthcare settings, medical professionals, those emergency and rescue operators like the first responders, and also people who experience personal trauma. These are the category of people that experience moral injury, but also combatants, those engaged in counterterrorism operations, particularly actors such as counterterrorism security agents, the 7th Division of the Nigerian Army, that's the Nigerian Police, Department of State Security Office. These are security agents that experience moral injury because of the experiences that they have, that they witness in counterterrorism operations. So you go to, this slide. So yeah, of course, if you look at the map, that's the map of the Lake Chad, which borders Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Southern Cameroon. Like I said, these are the actors, those who are involved in counterterrorism, both terrorist operators and also security agents. And so there are certain challenges that have been experienced in counterterrorism operations by security agents, such as mutiny by counterterrorism security agents. And some of them turn on each other. Some of them are committing suicides. There have been various forms of mass resignation. And we have seen issues about misappropriation of funds intended to combat terrorism, poor welfare of soldiers, and how the ways in which the Operation Safe Corridor is received by the community, and cases of recidivism where terrorists people go back, those repentant terrorists go back to join Boko Haram. These are the challenging counterterrorism operations in northern Nigeria and the Lake Chad. So go to the next slide. And so one of the arguments that we've made, that have led to a lot of publication, is about how these issues around sexual violence, complicated sexual violence against men have been documented in several armed conflicts. And within that debate, we have seen issues about sex as a weapon of war is one of the predominant debates on conflict-related sexual violence. And all other scholars have argued about oversimplifying the logic of conflict-related sexual violence beyond the idea of weapon of war arguments. And one key thing that have been also argued is that there is a need for us to look at the victim-centered perspective on the logic and consequences of conflict-related sexual violence, and how we can integrate that into global frameworks on the rationale, on the nature and the rationale and the consequences of conflict-related sexual violence. In that debate was linked to an argument made by one of the participants, one of the victims of sexual violence in Uganda, where they questioned the researchers that can you ejaculate without feeling the desire for sex? And so that's one of the arguments they make is the sex story, that sexual violence or committed sexual violence is not only about power and domination, but also about sexual gratification. And we're also drawing from victim-centered perspective, we argue that one of the drivers of sexual violence is spiritual security, because when we interviewed some of the participants, many of them were saying, the idea of same-sex violence is so vexatious or something that they cannot be able to make sense out of. And so many of them believe, of course, the idea of it as a ritual is rooted in their heteronormative and collective homophobia that we argue that, more like defined large section of the Nigerian state. And so scholars then argue that there's a need for future contextual and empirical studies in understanding committed sexual violence. And one of the things that we did now was to look at why there is a victim tone of victim-centered lens in committed sexual violence. What we try to do is to look at the perpetrator-centered lens, because we don't have much discourse around these issues, more because of the lack of empirical data to make those claims. And so we looked at it from the perpetrator-centered lens on the logic and consequences of sexual violence during wartime. Our study situates the logic of committed sexual violence as a result of perpetrators' moral injuries. We argue that in Nigerian counter-terrorism operation, there is, of course, the operation of funds for countering Boko Haram and ISWAP, which leads to shortages of weapons to curb Boko Haram, and fatalities within these among the ranks of security agencies. This leads to feelings of betrayal, of anger, of hostility and rage among them, and also violence against themselves and others, including instances of conflict-related sexual violence, and which also leads to more feelings of guilt and shame. So we argue that moral injury arises when counterterrorism security agents witness or become aware of violence against young men and boys by colleagues without seeking justice. That is guilt-based moral injury. So these emotions are linked to their personal, social, cultural, religious, and institutional ethics that they believe goes against such violence incidents. And so in our research, we used the data set is 31 study participants that includes both security agents, victims of survivors, NGO workers, and legal practitioners. So it was through purposive sampling and snowballing. And so we got ethical clearance from the National Health Research Ethics Committee, Department of Health Planning, Research and Statistics, Federal Ministry of Health in Abuja. So we also use secondary sources from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and also relevant literatures in the field to make to write this paper. One of the findings, like I said earlier, is that within counterterrorism operations, the misappropriation of funds, Boko Haram and ISWAP terrorists are well equipped and are ideologically motivated, resulting in substantial loss of life and diminished morale due to inadequate resources. And the impact of Operation Safe Corridor, which of course we all know is a de-radicalization and mitigation program, where they give clemency to Boko Haram, this has further created feelings of betrayal and rage among security agents. And many of them are taking this violence, not just against themselves, not just in terms of mutiny against the military hierarchy, but against those who they believe are terrorist suspects. And so one of the findings that we discovered in our research is one of the security agents said something about, I can allow any opportunity to make you suffer directly or indirectly. So when we argue betrayal, bitterness, and anger as a motivation of sexual violence, because we argue that there's a decline in morale, anger among security agents, which directs their anger towards military authorities or commanders. There's also the feeling of injustice and rage, and the one way of getting back at the society is to take attack many of these boys who were kidnapped from their villages and are recruited as foot soldiers of terrorists. So because of the belief that these young people are suspects, so they carry out various forms of sexual violence against them, both sexual torture and rape. So that is one of the findings. But there's also the guilt-based moral injury, where there was an instance, one of the security agents told us about of a case whereby in their camp, when they went out to the field, one of the soldiers came back and sexually violated a boy, and the boy cried out, and people came out and they caught the soldier. So, but because of certain politics playing out and the soldier, they couldn't get justice for the victim, the warrant officer who was in charge of the camp said a lot of things, and he was very uncomfortable. He was saying things like, I have conscience, I have children of my own. So he was more like struggling with the emotions of not getting justice for those victims. And so within that camp, what they call camp boys, many of the security agencies, they treat them like their siblings. So, and so when that incident happened, some of the younger officers summoned courage to meet the higher rank officers to get them to do something about this, about that particular incident. So they struggle with the person, their conscience, because they often, the warrant officer was saying, I have a conscience, I have children of my own. I can't allow this to happen. And so for 3 months, he was struggling with that emotion. At the end of the day, he had to summon courage and met a brigadier general who later took the case up and they, more like removed the guy from the military. So he said, I cannot condone this. I have children of my own. I have conscience. So emotions experienced by counter-terrorism security agents members for not acting immediately to get justice for the victims. And so in conclusion, we argue that emotions are powerful motivators for human behavior, especially in high-stress situations like conflict, war, and conflict exacerbates these negative emotions. Emotions are intertwined with power, dynamics, and decision-making. The literature on wartime sexual violence and gender-based violence portrays male combatants as increasingly demographically dominant perpetrators. The study contributes to a careful engagement with the layers of violence by perpetrators by combatants, especially in counterterrorism operations, as forms of moral injury. In doing so, it offers a critical reading of these actions as a transgression of normative cultural norms. It argues that such experiences contribute to moral injuries that continue to linger in the minds of perpetrators and creates a cycle of violence. So our study stresses the urgent need to nuance, reframe, and revitalize the literature on conflict and post-conflict gender subjectivity. It focuses on the power structures and mental health of perpetrators and provide empirical evidence on the logic and outcome of moral injury. So it underscores the significance of trauma-informed psychological intervention for counterterrorism security agents and also for victims who are often neglected, in the whole focus on counterterrorism. So yeah, I think that is all I can say. So I welcome comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Emeka Njoku and Dr. Isaac Derry for humanizing, using social science tools, what I would consider to be the emotional dimension, looking at moral injuries of sexual and gender-based violence in the context of war. This is really a highly innovative perspective. It is one that also speaks to field work, and I would also expect that there will be more questions to Dr. Njoku about how he was able to navigate the field in Nigeria as well as the Lake Chad region, and the policy dimension of his work. Like the other preceding presentations, this paper also draws on some of Professor Olufunke Okome's work, looking at trauma, looking at violence. I want to commend all the speakers so far for keeping to time. I think we will have enough time to thoroughly discuss and debate these highly interesting papers. It is now my honor to call on the fifth presenter, and he's no other than Dr. Omotola Onike, who initially confused me with his first name. But having now seen him virtually, I would say that he also is based at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev, which I believe is in Israel. You will correct me if I am not right. He is doctor, but someday he will become a professor. So he will forgive me for addressing him as professor, just as I would ask Fatima Abdullahi to forgive me for calling her professor. She's going to become a professor one of these days. Now, back to the presentation. The title of the presentation is Kidnapping and Herder Farmer Violence in Nigeria by Tolani Onike. Now you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Professor Olufunke for this opportunity. I feel it's a privilege for me to speak among the giants in the grace, which I will be part of them later in life. Thank you so much. The title of my paper is Nature and Conflicts, Kidnapping and Cattle Herders Violence, Herders Farmers Violence in Nigeria. It's a chapter on my thesis, which is about nature and governance, rural grazing area in Edo State. So this one talks about Nigeria. This one is a work in progress because I have to interview from other things. But I've done some couple of interviews, but it's still need a good touch to that effect. This paper is about the representation of nature, conflict, kidnapping, and cattle herders farmers violence in Nigeria. It engages the interaction between humans and non-humans in shaping the history of conflict in rural communities. Primary sources include newspaper articles, colonial reports, and interviews, which espouse the long-term economic, social, and political consequences of government intervention in addressing the conflict between farmers and herders in Nigeria. Commercial animal husbandry has historically been a significant component of the Nigerian economy. Cattle herding has thus been a prominent aspect of social life in Nigeria, particularly in recent years. The movement of cattle to new places and regions where cattle farming was not the primary occupation has created a crisis between farmers and herders. This laid the foundation of the crisis between farmers and herders in places like Igogon, Secretary Igona, Adani Nibo, that's Pamit, that's Ibo, Agbo, so Nogo, the Beron community in the southern and middle belt regions of Nigeria. The existing body of scholarship has focused on herder farmer conflict in the middle belt region of Nigeria. Why these works are useful for understanding how nature, environment, and degradation and the degradation of conflict over arable land, they are also inadequate for understanding the unique situation in southern region of Nigeria, where there are cases of kidnapping, killing, violence, and violence act. This study reviewed the government intervention toward the history of rural conflicts, environmental challenges, and resource scarcity. It also had to the study of doing scholarship on farmers' herder conflicts, specifically focusing on some communities in the middle belt and southern regions of Nigeria. My work will start from the colonial down to post-colonial because the crisis between herders and farmers in Nigeria started from the colonial era. The history of rural conflict between herders and farmers was seen in the colonial era in Nigeria and has increasingly posed complex and severe socio-economic challenges to many communities in Nigeria. These violent conflicts, primarily driven by conflicting interests over scarce resources, such as land and water, have begun to significantly impact the livelihoods of individuals directly involved and the broader economic stability of Nigeria, middle belt, and southern regions. The report discussed and dissected how opening grazing led to the land encroachment and destruction of farmland in the colonial era. In 1937, the Mint Family Report mentioned the windy drought of the Saharan region as threatening the practice of commercial animal husbandry due to the lack of grazing land and water accessibility. All these highlight the need for nomadic herders to modify their traditional animal husbandry through the movement of cattle to where there is grazing land and water accessibility. The missing farming cattle herders from farmers in Benue, Jos, Pashi in the middle belt use the agricultural director. In fact, to a pagan tribe and led to the encroachment of farmland and forest reserve, destroying the traditional occupations of others, such as farmers, hunters, and conservators. The encroachment of the pagans' land has generated conflict among pagans, Fulani herders, and military officials. The argument convicted another report that shared that open grazing affected farmland and forest reserve. They both reached a compromise in Gwari Native Authority in 1937 that inhabitants and the Fulani herders reached an agreement concerning the Alawa Forest Reserve that the pagans should have access to the forest to collect honey, catching grass, clay, herbaceous plants, and attend ceremonial. Other pagan ceremony within the reserve, the right to fish in all streams, rivers, and water was also approved by the Native Authority of the Gwari Native Reserve for the inhabitants of the Luna Alawa district. The inhabitants of Rapi, Ura, Tugan, Ura, Zulumi, Gadaga, Masuku, and the rest would have proper access to on the forest reserve of Alawa district. So the connection between the colonial era, post-colonial era, and now is the government intervention in the crisis between herders and farmers. The colonial laws formed and enforced some decisions that enabled both farmers and herders to live together. And these laws were drafted to practically structure colonial rule on people and control their resources in colonial era. There were laws surrounding colonial veterinary medicine to control human and animal relations. The concept of modernism to enforce discipline was smoothly run during the colonial, but it was lacking with immediate post-colonial Nigeria. Climate change and the scarcity of resources affected the pastoralism in the Sahelian region in the colonial era and still play a crucial factor in the post-colonial Nigeria. I would by this stress that the clash between herders and farmers in the Middle Belt region of Nigeria made it northern to see the need for the establishment of grazing areas in Umakura, Jankari, and other places in 1954. And it was extended in 1965. The same thing happened in the Western region during the era of Mojubaolu in 1960, in which rural grazing area was established in 4 places, in 3 provinces, 2 in Abeokuta province, 1 in Oyo province, and 1 in Ondo province. The mobility of cattle towards northern region fully emerged. But all the rural grazing system that was established by the north and also in western failed. The western owned failed as a result of military intervention in their policies. The rural grazing area did not fail as a result of heavy dependence of Nigerian government on oil. The oil boom crisis in 1970, the SAP in the 1980s destroyed the activities of rural grazing in the north, also in the south. In this, it is in 2 ways: remove costs and mitigate costs. The remove costs with failure toward the SAP crisis, the oil boom crisis, the immediate loss was that the veterinary posts that were established in north, the lack of drainage system not affected the operation of rural grazing area to continue the operation in north. So the mobility of cattle toward southern region fully emerged due to the 1980 project of grazing area enacted in 1965 by the Northern Regional Assembly. Open grazing area continued in southern region, and this operation did not affect farmland, and no serious conflicts emanated from the law. The cattle herders were operated along the farm routes in several communities, not beside the farm. Not inside the farm. The participant in the interview submitted. The participant interview unanimously agreed that either farmer open grazing or farmland illegal marked the beginning of the conflict in 2008 because it destroyed the farm produce, which was the source of income for the farmer. One of the participants said pointed that Fulani herders would not enter farm in those days in the 80s. Even if mango existed, they maintained by abstaining from farm. They did not touch what did not belong to them. At my mother village, we pluck mangoes and sold to Fulani. I mean mangoes that were very close to the settlement. Fulani settlements, especially in the were close to us. They will not pluck what did not belong to them. The newspaper reports of the issue of conflict between herders and farmers in several communities in Nigeria align with the interview at the government about kidnapping, destruction, killing, and migration. Aside Benue, Plateau, and Taraba, where the crisis has been tense, the spread of conflict into the southern states aggravates trade relations among the country's major regional ethnic and religious groups, where 3 herders were arrested in Lagos, in Ogun State in 2018. So in 2019, so the federal government introduced rural grazing areas to curb the conflict between herders and farmers. But it has ethno-religious perspective. The southern part of the country believes that rural grazing area is a program designed for herders, not for non-herders. So the southern part, coupled with the state in the middle belt, disagree with that proposal. And then as the rural base was going on, the state government from the southern part of the country, coupled with some state in the middle belt, drafted anti-grazing bill into law to prevent open grazing among the farmers. So the consequence of that led to crisis again. Example of which was Eagle. The rise of violence in the post-trade rural projects. The scheme suspension led to the signing of anti-open grazing bill into law in 2019. It consequently led to the violence in several communities that practice farming. The manifestation of Adiagbo, one of the Tabia, connected to post-trade project to mark the birth and implementation of anti-grazing bill in 2020 in law. In 2020, some Fulani herdsmen kidnapped people here, and the vigilante officer in Ayitek took one of them to Ibadan. Salu Seliki called AID in Zone 11 Osogbo for their release. Shino Olupolu released him based on the solid connection Solly had with them. AID, yeah. So I sent a petition to Alaafin, and Alaafin fought Sabingana, a traditional ruler in Ghana of lots of Ilogun. Sabingana took Salu from Papa Yaka to Alaafin. He spent 2 weeks there. He left there in December and came to Ibadan. He reported the case to Adegbemi, and then by January, the crisis started in 2021, and then that also my impact, the impact of post-trade rural programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nike. You ended abruptly. I don't know if that was because you had run out of time, but I am sure that during the question and answer session, there will be some time for further engagement with your paper. Your paper is very interesting in that you adopt a historical approach. And you remind everyone that the farmer-herder conflict did not just start today. It has a long history from initially cordial relations to somehow conflictual relations. Your work also touches on some of the work of Professor Okome, in the sense that you talk about the disruptive impact of the structural adjustment program. And this reminds me of one of her 7 books titled A Sapped Democracy, the Political Economy of the Structural Adjustment Program and the Political Transition in Nigeria, 1983 to 1993. So while the other presenters have focused on gender, violence, sexual-based violence, banditry, and other forms of violence, your own discussion of violence in being faithful to history has connected it to the question of the structural adjustment programs, what one may call the socioeconomic impact of structural adjustment, as well as somehow the politics of violence that has pervaded the country essentially since the end of military rule. Probably some would argue that this is partly a legacy of the military rule, or perhaps the militarization of Nigerian politics. Now, distinguished scholars, ladies and gentlemen, we have listened to 4 very incisive analyses, or 5 very interesting analyses, sorry. I had a request initially for Professor Don Robotham to give an address, a brief address, to shine some light on the work of the distinguished scholar on whose behalf this, in whose honor this panel is being held. But I am told that he is not online. So without further ado, I will now invite our distinguished participants to ask questions. I am not sure whether they'll be using the Q&A box or whether they can actually speak and I can hear them, and would then ask whoever they are asking the questions to respond. Let me say this. Since I can hear each and every one of you, I can say you should indicate by raising your hands whether you want to ask yourself, whether you want to ask a question, identify the person for whom the question is being directed, your name and your affiliation, and your question. It will be helpful if you just ask maybe 1 or 2 questions and don't try to make another presentation. So the floor is now open. There's a gentleman at the back in a green shirt, and a gentleman in the front in a blue shirt, and a gentleman in black French suit. So the man in the green shirt would go first, the man in the blue short sleeve shirt in front will go second, and the gentleman in black, whose hand is just coming down, will go third. So please proceed. Your name, your affiliation, and your question.
Okay, sir. So I have 2 questions, and I'll be very brief. My name is Philip Olayoso. I coordinate the Western Transitional Justice Center. My question will go to my very good friend, Dr. Olufunke, and Dr. Fantina. So, for Dr. Olufunke, I love the presentation, and I understand the security that such a research will entail. And I'm looking at Bilal Hassan, for instance, who has just been released in Australia, and the politics of his release, that he had to also negotiate admitting to accessing classified information of the US government for forensic security. So my question to you, having been privileged to be part of the Operation Safe Corridor, is like 2-pronged. How do you balance the national policy and security into investigating this kind of research without compromising your own security in the first instance? And it's very surprising to me that the Operation Safe Corridor, which is an initiative of the military, this has always been, not been stressed enough. 11 colonels, rank colonels in the military initiated this. What is the reason why members of the military are aggrieved, within the context of its implementation? What do you say accounts for these grievances for them? Then for Adia, I think I was prepared to do some work in the Northwest, Sokoto, Katsina, Kaduna. And I'm looking at, for instance, Sokoto context of I missed part of the presentation, so if you address it, don't worry. The Fulani Hausa conflict, the farmer area, where the Fulani are actually at disadvantage when it comes to the judicial implementation in Sokoto, for instance. This is what I know as a fact. So my question is, are there like cultural, because I looked at the resilience aspects of this, are there like cultural practices aside from Islam, which can enable addressing some ethnic challenges that, obtains when it comes to the relation between Hausa and Fulani in the Northwest? Don't worry if it's not there. Maybe we'll discuss outside the okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. Those are 2 very incisive questions, one for Dr. Emeka Njoku and the other for Dr. Fatima Abdullahi. I would ask them to note how they want to respond while we go to the gentleman in the blue short sleeve shirt. You identify yourself, your affiliation, and ask a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Abdullahi Garba. from the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Maiduguri. Sir, I have a question, and I would like to seek for indulgence to allow me to make observation on the research on Boko Haram, paper presented by Professor Oriola. Thank you, sir. Now, my first question is, I'm skeptical on the methodology adopted in conducting research on Boko Haram insurgency. Most of the scholars and writers, especially those who are outside Nigeria, did not conduct field work. They wrote based on library research, or I can say internet research, and perhaps sometimes the use of newspaper. How valid can we regard their work in that they did not participate in either participant observation or conducting fieldwork directly? And my other observation is the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Maiduguri, has a large catcher of oral data that I can beat my chest, hardly if any university in Nigeria had. The department was commissioned by the Nigerian Army during the time of former Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General T.Y. Buratai, who was an alumnus of the department and the university as well. He commissioned the department to conduct an intensive oral interview, which was transcribed and documented about 1,000.
Can you be quick? We just have only 4 minutes left.
All right.
Can you just make your question short?
Okay. I made my question. Now this is observation, and
yeah, make it short.
Okay. Now we have a large catcher of about 1,000 pages, and another research was conducted, breaking the pieces, sponsored by Polande Shom Polande, who is in Sheffield, United Kingdom presently. I think there is need for collaboration between universities in order to harness those material or data that have been kept in the Department of History and Strategic Studies. So thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you short now. The last person who wants to ask a question, can you just make it one sentence?
I've finished my own.
Thank you. The gentleman in black, can you just make it your name and then one sentence question?
Actually, my question is quite across all the lessons, but I'm limited to the issue of sexual violence and doctor from here. That's last year there was this publication by the Human
Can you
Rights
ask the question, please, sir?
I'm asking.
Can you go straight to the question?
What is the evidence that can back up this scholarly interpretation of this sexual violence against men? Because the Nigerian Army has came to debunk that assertion because it was published, I think, last year. Then secondly, to Dr. here, on enhancement, I carried out the fieldwork in Mambila, that is Mambila Plateau in Taraba State, where they have that ranching issues. So here in the north, called north here, we have this issue of encroachment of land and whatever. And we are very able to bring the colonial and post-colonial perspective. Now that this grazing land has been taken over, the roots has been taken over, what can you propose as a solution to this perma-hardest issue?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. For those who have been asked questions, 1 minute to respond and we have to close. I am sorry, but I have received my orders that we have run over time and we have to end. So if you want to respond, respond with one sentence. I apologize again.
I think Adria wants to go first. Adria, please proceed.
One sentence. Thank you.
I didn't get the question, so maybe after.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullahi. We'll now go to Professor Riola.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I just want to say to the gentleman, thank you for your question. But respectfully, I was in Nigeria for field work every year from 2014 to 2019. And I was in Maiduguri twice in 2019. Those interviews were and focus group discussions were from my 2019 interview. I take it that you're not familiar with my work, which is 100% understandable. My work is based on very rigorous field work. And I did not ask some research assistants to go and do the research on my behalf. I was there. I might have not communicated that properly. I was there, but I needed RAs, research assistants, to help with the language. So again, no offense taken. I just wanted to point that out. I may be outside Nigeria, but Nigeria is dear to my heart. I am in Nigeria whenever the opportunity presents itself, and my work is based on rigorous field work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not the least, I know that Dr. Onike.
Okay, I want to respond to the question.
One sentence.
Okay, in terms of how the Nigerian government has, the Nigerian government, the military has debunked the claim about sexual violence against them many times. But from my research, we've interviewed young boys who were sexually violated, and they often give, they informed us that this sexual violence are taking place were by security agents themselves, by Boko Haram and ISWAP, and also by community men. So rape and sexual torture from security agents.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Dr. Nike, last one sentence.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. When Ruga project was launched in 2019, the southern governors objected it. But the interesting thing about this was that the governors of northwestern part of Nigeria accepted the program. And they were even prepared towards that when immediately the government launched it. So I feel that in respect of the nature of the northern part, I think they should partner with Israel to understand the concept of grazing area.
Thank you very much. I see that Professor Robotham is here with us, but he has to promise that he would only speak for 1 minute because we are running out of time and people are leaving the session. Professor Robotham, do you hereby undertake to speak for 1 minute?
Yes, I do. I will.
Please go ahead, and then we have to close. I'm sorry, we are under serious pressure.
No problem. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work that Professor Okome is doing in New York. She has worked extremely hard. It's a very difficult thing to promote African studies in New York. And along with you as well, Cyril, she put on the Bring Back Our Girls event. She put on the COVID event. She put on events on Nigerian elections, a host, immigration to Europe, a host of activities in New York. And I want to thank her particularly for the tremendous work that she has done there.
Can you introduce yourself, sir?
Okay, Professor Robotham is, I think he's emeritus now, professor of anthropology at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And he's a senior scholar. He's one of the, actually, he's my only mentor.
Thank you very much. Prof, do you want to say anything or can we wrap up?
Well, yes, I really appreciate the great work that all the scholars have done. And it's gratifying to see that people find my work useful. And actually the trauma paper, I remember how traumatic it was when I wrote it. And some people, the reviewers' comment is that this is irrelevant. And it was one of my really serious fights with with Dr. Obi, because I said, I'm not changing anything. And if he doesn't want to publish it, he can just throw it out. So I'm glad that that work is evoking scholarly responses of the quality that I'm hearing. And thank you very much. Kudos to you all. I look forward to maybe collaboration with you in future.
Thank you very much, Professor Okome. And on that note, I want to thank Professor Tebitope Oriola, Professor Abosedi Babatunde, Dr. Fatma Abdullahi, as well as Emeka Njoku and Isaac Derry, Dr. Emeka Njoku and Dr. Isaac Derry, and Dr. Omotolani Onike for putting up this very impressive array of papers. I want to thank all the participants that stayed to the very end. Thank you so much. I probably didn't introduce myself. I am Cyril Obi, and I'm the Program Director of the Social Science Research Council's African Peace Building Network and Next Generation Social Sciences in Africa program. I am based in Brooklyn, New York, and I visit Nigeria regularly. So those of us who are abroad have not forsaken Nigeria. We come home. Nigeria is still home, and we do field work. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and goodbye from here.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.